Brothers and sisters, or should I say sisters and brothers, I think they're uncounted. Maybe it's about equal. I can't say sister and brother at the same time. Yeah, so I came into the movement in 1970. It's rather difficult to grasp, even for me. So 30, 40, 44 years ago, nearly. And, well, I'll tell you, first of all, I'll tell you how I came into contact with the movement. It might be of some interest to you. I had a sort of wake-up call, perhaps many of us have a wake-up call, occasions when we feel, I must do something. I must do something with my life. I must find out, if I can, what life is all about. And I happened to be listening to the song of a troubadour. I don't know whether you know anything about troubadours, but they were the kind of courtly singers. They used to go from castle to castle, apparently in the Middle Ages, entertaining the gentry. And someone was playing a song that was actually being sung in Old French. And as I listened to this song, the voice said to me, I don't really understand Old French, but I picked up a few words here and there. What I heard him say was, you are leading a life of complete hedonism. If you go on like this, you'll go to hell. So this came as a bit of a shock to me, as you can imagine. And it started me on a path which I'd begun 15 years earlier, at the age of 15, reading an account of Buddhism. And I'd had a sort of vision of the Buddha, or at least a figure clad in orange robes, seated under a tree, and with a beautiful golden aura around his head and body. And I thought to myself, that's curious, I'd like to do that. So that started me on the path, but I was diverted by various things, which I won't go into now, until that wake-up call. And I remembered that I'd wanted to find a Buddhist teacher. So that very day I went to the Charing Cross Road in London, which of course, I haven't been to the Charing Cross Road recently, but certainly in those days it used to be full of bookshops and notices about spiritual teachers of all kinds. And I thought maybe there I'd find, an advertisement for a Buddhist teacher. Anyway, as I came up onto the pavement from the underground station, there on the opposite side of the road was this man in orange robes. But he had long hair, which was a bit of a surprise, because I thought men in orange robes always had shaved heads, but this one didn't. And I thought, maybe that's the man I'm looking for. But anyway, a few moments later he disappeared down the side road, and I was left wondering. Anyway, to cut this particular story short, a few months later, I happened to be talking with a friend about meditation. I remembered that I wanted to learn to meditate, you see, at the age of 15. And this chap said, well, yes, I meditate. I asked him, do you meditate? He said, yes, I meditate. And I said, well, could you teach me? And he said, well, it's better if you come to a proper class. So I said, well, who's your teacher? And he said, well, he's a man who's actually an Englishman. He spent 20 years in India as a monk, and come back to the UK. So I was given the name and address of the place to go, and it happened to be in Monmouth Street, just above Trafalgar Square. Don't know whether you know your London. Quite a narrow street. So I went there on the appointed day, and the front of the shop, quite a small shop, which was selling sort of Eastern curios. I haven't got a very clear recollection of it actually, things like incense and maybe little statues of one sort or another. And so I went inside and found that there was a young man wearing one of these, or something very similar. It wasn't actually identical in those days. It was certainly a band of roughly this width, of white material, with Dharma chakra wheels embroidered in gold. and with the same, series, the same knot, or two knotted chords. And he taught something called the mindfulness of breathing. He was a very thin young man, and he sat in the full lotus with his, one leg on each thigh, so I tried to imitate him. It was excruciatingly painful. But I did find the practice beneficial despite that. So I thought I'll go along the next week. So I went along the second week, and there was another young man, also wearing one of these, also thin, and also seated with both feet on his thighs. So I thought, well, this is mandatory. So again I tried, and this time I was taught the Metta, which was a bit difficult to do in the midst of pain. I was impressed by both young men. They seemed very self-assured. And, well, the other people who came up, perhaps I should mention them, they were kind of, I suppose, hippies, I would describe them as nowadays. I wasn't quite a hippie myself. I hadn't really, I think the expression was turned on, tune in and drop out. That was the expression in those days. I tried to turn on with partial success and tune in with very little success, but drop out, no, I still was working as an architect. So I wasn't quite one of them, but I wasn't, at the same time, I didn't really identify with the rest of society. In fact, I thought, as so many of my friends did in those days, that the older generation was mad, completely off its rocker. After all, the Bay of Pigs, we just got through that, as it were, with Khrushchev and Kennedy, facing each other, glaring at one another at the United Nations. And we thought, well, how is it that, we can have got into this situation? Our parents, the older generation, must be mad, stark, raving mad. And many of us wanted to escape from that, which in a way is not a bad thing. And in a way, it's not a bad thing to regard Buddhism, regard the path as an escape. So long as you don't regard it as escapism, you see what I mean? It's not something to kind of, it's not a way of escaping the responsibilities of being human and of being in a particular situation, as we are, and we're all embedded in society. We can't really escape from it. Well, we can escape partially, we can go on a solitary retreat. But no, here we are on this planet Earth, sailing through the heavens with, was it 7 billion other people? And if we're Buddhists, if we practice the path, surely we begin to feel some kind of kinship with them and some concern for them. So it's certainly not escapism in that sense. We don't want to escape from that perception that human beings are in need of assistance, in need of guidance. But I suppose I very consciously wanted an escape from neurotic worry, I wanted an escape from ignorance as well. I mean, there were many things about being, about existence, about the world that I didn't understand. I wanted to gain some understanding of them. So this was another motivation. But anyway, I'm diverting a little bit. Let's get back to those early days. Well, it's not, of course, those ideas, those motivations were there very much in those days. It was the time of the Beatles, of pop music from the East, the Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi and so on had a big following. There were others too. So there was an interest in the East, an interest in Eastern matters, an interest even in mysticism, as well as dope. So anyway, I went along the third week to this little centre in Monmouth Street, which was called Sakura. And this time there were a lot more people there. There was a real sort of buzz in the air, as if there was some kind of electricity. There was definitely an excitement. So I asked, well, what's happening? And they said, "Oh, Bhante is here." I said, "Bhante? Who's Bhante?" I said, "Well, he's our guru." I felt a little shiver of apprehension, I think I can say. Because, well, I'd met by that time quite a lot of disciples of gurus, and I wasn't very impressed by them, I must say. I thought they were all a bit mad, and some of them were definitely addicted to drugs. I didn't think that was a good advertisement for gurus. Also, there were often big advertisements in the tube in those days for guru this and guru that. And they would often claim to be Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and the Buddha, all rolled into one. Well, of course, now it seems completely absurd, now that we know a little bit more, about so-called Eastern religions. But I suppose in those days some people were taken in by these things, by these absurd claims. So, third week I went along, and we had our class again with a young man wearing one of these. And then afterwards, we were told that Bhante would be conducting a question and answer session downstairs. So I thought, this is my chance to find out what sort of guru this man is. So we all trooped downstairs. I was the last one down, and I felt my heart going feeling quite anxious. Was he going to be a good guru or a bad guru? Was he going to be a white magician or a black magician? These sort of thoughts went through my mind. Was I going to be bewitched and bewildered or enlightened? I mean, these are very serious existential questions. So, yes, we trooped downstairs, and there was a curtain. It was a habit in those days. Thank you. The arrangement was that if a room was used for meditation, the door would be propped open and a curtain or a blanket pinned over it, so you've got a soft entrance. I rather like that idea. Nowadays we have hard entrances, but I rather like those soft entrances somehow. Anyway, I tweaked the curtain aside, and the little shrine room was full of people. But there was nobody that looked remotely like a Bhante or a guru there, so I scratched my head and noticed over the opposite side of the little corridor there was another room which was door half open, and a notice board there. So I thought, notices on it, I thought to myself, I'll see what's going on here. So it sounds quite uninhibited in a way. So edged myself into the room and looked at the notice board. And then after reading just a few notices, I felt prickling on the back of my neck. I looked round, and there, seated in the corner, was the chap I'd seen on the opposite side of the road 3 months ago. So it came as a real shock to me. He looked very steadily at me, and I noticed that he had a little smile. And also that he had a very bright aura. You could see auras in those days. So I went on looking at him, and I began to think, he's reading my mind. And when I thought this, he gave another little smile. I was really freaked out. I went out, without saying a word to him, I went out, exited from the room. Completely upstaged or outsmarted or whatever. But then I thought, this is ridiculous. This is the man, I'm sure, that I wanted to meet. So I tweaked aside the curtain outside the shrine, finally squeezed in and sat down. Bhante followed me just a few seconds later. He started giving a question and answer session. And, it was the sort of thing he did in those days, at fairly regular intervals. People had all sorts of questions. And he hadn't, at that time at least, given all that many lectures. Even if one gives a lecture, one never knows, of course, what questions are going to come up, what it will provoke in people. He began the question and answer session. There were lots of questions, some very good ones. What I noticed was that Sometimes he answered the question directly, but sometimes not. Sometimes he answered what seemed to lie behind the question, what was the motivation for asking it. I thought it was very astute of him, great. And also his incredible breadth of knowledge and depth of understanding and humour and energy, very, very good sort of flow of energy he had, was very deeply impressive. So I thought to myself, well, who is this man? I kept on asking this question in my mind, who is he? As I listened. And after a while, a little voice inside me, and to this day I don't know whether it's my own it was my own voice or some other voice, said, this is your guru. So I thought, all right, well, I'd better stay with him until I'm enlightened. So here I am, I'm still with him. I'm his secretary, as it happens nowadays. I haven't been his secretary very long, about a year. So anyway, I'm jumping, as you can see, back and forth, but never mind. That's the nature of the mind. The mind is timeless, actually. Or rather, time is a product of the mind. It's the way the mind works. It's something to reflect on. But yes, so that was the beginning. That was my beginning, my first 3 sessions of the very early, though not the very earliest beginnings of the movement. It had begun in 67 and 68. And this was 1970. And there were a few order members around. Not all of them. Some of them had already fallen by the wayside, as we say. I think they hadn't really understood what it meant to be a Buddhist. And well, surely nowadays we can see that, how that can be, how it must have been in those days. Because what did people know about Buddhism in those days? There were no Dharma books to speak of. There were just various teachers teaching strange things. So Bhante had a tremendous task ahead of him. He had somehow to communicate the essence of the Dharma, or as much about the Dharma as was helpful or necessary. But of course what he did first of all was to get us meditating, which was, in a way, the obvious thing to do, because ultimately we have to be our own guides. I mean, we can take as much advice and as much teaching as we're capable of assimilating, but it's all useless without practice, without actually looking inwards and discovering our own minds and discovering how our minds, or to what extent our minds may be enlightened. So, what happened after that, after monastery? Well, very soon, to my great disappointment, after I'd joined the movement, notice was given to us that we had to quit the building because it was going to be demolished. Actually, it's still there standing to this day, with different occupants. But that's what we were told, so we had to get out. And for a whole year, Bhante wandered from place to place. He'd hire a basement of a vegetarian restaurant, I remember in particular. We used to go, and there were a large number of cats, and there was a cat with a large number of kittens there. And the kittens, when Bhante sat meditating, he used to meditate beautifully with very comfortably crossed legs, and his hands, beautifully relaxed in his lap. And he still wore his orange robes in those days. The kittens would come and sit in his lap. They were obviously very much at home there. But because we had to move around so much, the following, as it were, diminished, and some of us began to wonder whether the whole thing was falling apart. By this time, Bhante had already was doing a number of things. He wasn't simply trying to start a new movement. He was, in a way, this was part of starting a new movement. He would go and visit Buddhist groups all over the country, all over the UK, England, Scotland, I don't know about Ireland, I'm not sure whether he ever went to Ireland in those days. He also went to America. He spent 2 or 3 months at Yale University, where he became very, very popular apparently. And also became very ill. He got very bad pneumonia, I think, and came back and very nearly died. But anyway, so he was very active. He wasn't always there teaching. There were already a number of people, as I explained, my first 2 teachers were young men with white cases, sitting in the full lotus posture, who I thought of as I tried to describe to myself what they were, how I felt about them. And I thought to myself, these are sort of philosopher yogis. Philosopher yogis, that's how I describe them to myself. Unfortunately, no, one of them has come back. One of them left the movement and has come back. That was Dharmapala. Yes, Dharmapala. He's still with us. The other one has left, unfortunately. So, by the by, where do I stand now? We're in the kind of, I'm not going to use the word hierarchy, in terms of age of ordination, you know. I think there were 12 people ordained in the very first batch. Of those, I think only one remains, that's Ananda. No, Malini, 2 of them, Ananda and Malini. Malini lives in New Zealand. Who else is there? There's Vajradhaka, Buddhadasa, so that's 4. There's Bhante himself, of course, 5. I suppose I'm number 6. which is quite interesting, isn't it? You know, there are getting on for 2,000. How many order members do we have now, Sratagiri?
Yes, nearly 2,000.
Nearly 2,000. Yes. So in those days, there were just a small handful of people. So it's amazing how the movement has grown. So how has it happened? Well, one of the first things that I did quite soon after coming into contact with the movement was to go on retreat. Although I think Bhante asked people to wait at least 3 months before they went on retreat, so they at least knew how to meditate. And so we go to one of 2 country houses in the South Surrey countryside, very lovely places, run by the Ockenden Venture, which in those days I think was set up to deal with disadvantaged children, particularly from Tibet, but also from other places. One of them was called Keffols, the other one was called Ockenden, and I believe you've just seen a film which was, I think, it was Keffols, and that's where I was ordained actually. In fact, the clip that you probably saw of me, I don't really recognise. So, some similarities at least, I think that's about all I can claim. Yeah, so I was ordained then. I think possibly that was the beginning of the ordination retreat. The first half I cooked on for the retreat, but then somebody said to me, I think you've done enough. So the rest of the retreat I meditated and made myself ready for ordination. So that was just 1.5 years after my first contact with the movement. And I think it was only 3 months after my request. You know, I waited a while, I was a bit hesitant. And then somebody was ordained, so I thought to myself, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I went to Bhante and said, will you ordain me? He said, it's only a matter of time. So I had to wait, but I didn't have to wait very long. I think I got a letter from him, or maybe it was word of mouth, I don't know, just a couple of months later. He said, well, I'm going to ordain you on the summer retreat. I think it was the late summer retreat, actually, August. So that's what happened. How did Bhante do it? I mean, how many of you here have asked for ordination? Great, that's really good. And you know roughly what it takes nowadays. You you know that it involves studying, practicing, listening, reflecting, meditating for goodness knows how many years. Sorry, I don't want to be discouraging. But in those days, Bhante would just pick you, as it were. He'd just say, "Oh, you're ready." And, you know, that was it, really. And we just go on retreat and be ordained. And, well, naturally, there were a number of casualties. I mean, very often, Bhante's intuition, if that's indeed what it was very effective, and it worked. It worked with me, I think. I'm still here. With others, with a few, it didn't, sad to say. So, what happened next? Well, about a year after this sort of peripatetic period, when we were going from restaurant to restaurant, hall to hall, the kittens didn't follow us. We found Bhante was getting pretty desperate, I think. I remember he gave a Sangha Day talk in Centre House, Kensington. And he said more or less this. He said, "Look, we need a centre. If we don't get a centre here soon, I'm going to America." I haven't checked it, but that was my memory of what he said. So obviously this was a bit of a sort of bit of a hammer blow. So we set about looking, but it was actually, eventually, it was Bhante himself who found a place. He sent out a circular letter to all the London boroughs. And a letter came back from, I don't know which, Camden, yeah, may well have been Camden, Borough Council, saying there was an old piano repair factory in Archway that we might be interested in. So Bhante went to see it. He got Buddhadasa, who was to have given the talk today, but unfortunately had to go and attend to his mother, who is ailing and getting in need of attention. So he went with Buddhadasa, and they looked at it, and Bhante said to Buddhadasa, "What do you think? Can you do it?" And Buddhadasa thought, said, "Yes, I can do it." That was it. We acquired the place, exchanged contracts or whatever it was, and within, I think, a couple of months or even less, Buddhadasa had done the place up. He was an incredibly energetic and resourceful young man. Still is, even at 70. And we got for the first time our own place. But we got our own place. It was a 2-story building of a strange, not regular shape. And upstairs was the shrine room, downstairs was the reception, canteen. And apparently Buddhadasa asked Bhante, "Well, what kind of place do you want upstairs? Should there be a shrine?" So apparently Bhante sort of nodded. Buddhadasa tried to get some more details. Bhante wouldn't give him a clue. Buddhadasa set about building a little shrine. Bhante gave him a suitable image, which was a rather beautiful bronze miniature Kamakura Buddha. Very lovely. I think it was that one at first, although it may have changed later on. But in those days, of course, people didn't know what Buddhism was. And, we weren't familiar with Buddha images, and we thought, well, for beginners, they might think that we're a bit sort of cultish if we display the Buddha image. So Buddhadasa provided some curtains which covered up the shrine for beginners. And then when you were a bit more kind of initiated, into things, the curtains would part and there was the Buddha. So it was rather strange. I also remember meeting the young Subhuti. Some of you, do you all know about Subhuti? Does anybody not know about Subhuti? 1, 2. Okay, no reason why you should really. He's a very senior member of the order, very much a leader, very clear thinker, very resourceful, a very powerful speaker, very persuasive, very good-humoured and very warm and friendly. Anyway, I remember him, I was leading a study group. We were all sitting around in a little circle upstairs, and young Subhuti, wasn't Subhuti then, it was Alex Kennedy, came in, and I invited him to join us, and he said, I'm not going to study with you, and walked out again. That's a bit of an insight into the young Subhuti character. So what happened after that? Well, our number of followers began to increase quite markedly. People who we hadn't seen for several months began to reappear again once they discovered that we got a proper place. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? That we're perhaps a bit reluctant to follow around, to acknowledge that things are always changing, things are always moving on. And, well, if you've got a building, well, you must be respectable, mustn't you? You know, you must be solid, you must be real if you've got a building. So I suppose that played a part, in it as well. Anyway, for whatever reason, numbers began to increase quite markedly, and soon began to grow into scores, and even occasionally hundreds. Of course, we had to finance this building, and one of the things we did was to have jumble sales. And Bunty would participate in the jumble sales. You know, of course, those of us who were willing and able would collect all kinds of bric-a-brac. We'd hire a place, a suitable hall, set the stuff out, and await newcomers, having distributed leaflets and things like that. And Bunty would often be behind the counter, you know, selling things and pocketing, well, not pocketing, obviously putting the money in the kitty. So, yeah, that was the kind of scene. You know, that's what we had to do in those days. I remember visiting, he had a flat which he shared with a number of young men in Muswell Hill in those days, which was not far from Archway. And I saw how poor they were poor as church mice. And I was quite well lined in those days, I was working as an architect. And so I thought, okay, I know what they need. So I went and bought a 100-weight sack of rice, brown rice, and delivered it to their door. Of course, Bunty was delighted. So yes, they were downhill. Anyway, backtracking a little bit, before my ordination, just to give you an idea, what happened was, if you seemed a kind of promising person, I don't quite know how Bunty, well, maybe you could imagine, someone who's showing interest and asks intelligent questions and seems to be meditating, getting on with their meditation, what do you assume? Well, he's quite a serious-minded person. So certain people were invited to the advanced class. So I was very chuffed to be invited to an advanced class, which was held in Bunty's bedroom, well, sitting room. It was a sitting room. It was a tiny room, must have been 12 by 12 at most, I think, with a single bed in one corner, an armchair in another, little shrine over the fireplace, and 5 or 6 of us would sit around and meditate there. We'd be introduced to various Buddha and Bodhisattva forms, or we'd do the stupa visualization, we'd chant the Triratna, of course, at the beginning, and that was usually succeeded by textual study of some sort. And I remember the very first text that we studied was The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. I don't know whether any of you have come across it. It's a rather curious text. It's a Chinese text. No, it's by someone who claimed it's by the pseudo-Ashvagosha. I think later scholars have discovered that it wasn't actually the Ashvagosha that we're more familiar with. Anyway, the text is rather curious. And of course, young people, as we were in those days, were very interested in the different yanas, in the Hinayana, as it was called in those days, the Theravada, as we call it now, in the Mahayana, in the Vajrayana, especially we were interested in that, and even in Zen. And, well, that reminds me, Zen, yes, of course. One of the strange and curious figures in those days was Zengo, who appeared on the scene. And Bhante, in his usual way, tried to accommodate Zengo and introduce him and make him part of his movement. And Zengo was a very good meditation teacher. He sat very beautifully, he looked very elegant in his beautiful, immaculate, black, slinky robes, beautifully shaved head, and his slow, deliberate manner, which you may have seen on the film. But he began to go a bit funny. In those days we had our first small, excuse me, first small community down in Bali, still there, which is called Aryatara. And I was leading a weekend retreat down there. Anyway, I just started to lead a meditation. I was leading a meditation. I rang the bell. A few minutes after we started, Zengo came in. He was caught around the corner of my eye. He picked up the bell, which I got in front of me, and went and sat in front of the shrine, facing everybody else. So I waited until he settled. And I got up and retrieved the bell. I wasn't going to be outdone. And a bit later he declared that he was the Buddha Maitreya. And then I think the more sensible of us realised that he'd gone round the bend, to use a technical term. Anyway, he's still around apparently, running a very pleasant little garden somewhere, serving teas and things like that. So we did have from time to time these people who would come along and, as it were, try to take over Sendrax's disciples. Of course, none of them succeeded. But just a word of warning, in a way it's natural at first, before you become familiar with our movement, before you become a mentor, that you investigate other teachers. If you want, if you feel so inclined, nothing wrong with that. But you have to be aware that you are not unwittingly, as it were, taken into their sangha and making promises that you have no idea about in some foreign language. Because doing this sort of thing has a very profound effect on you. I mean, you participated in ceremonies of various kinds, probably most of you. You've participated in mitra ceremonies, even attended at ordination ceremonies. It has a very profound effect. You're committing yourself. Body, speech and mind, actually. But you may not, you need to be aware of what you're doing. Which is why nowadays we advise people, well, take it slowly. Take it little by little, find out what we're about. So this isn't going to go down very well on the film, but never mind. Not very elegant. So what happened, as the movement began to grow, Bhante realised that people were really thirsty for the Dharma. They really wanted to know, what is Buddhism? What is the Hinayana? What is Mahayana? What is Vajrayana? What is Zen? What's it all about? So he did his best. He gave scores and scores and scores of lectures and seminars, and they were wonderful. There was a tremendous sense of excitement and anticipation whenever they took place. He would usually give a whole series, like 6 or 8 lectures. They'd be announced, we'd hire a big hall. And I remember particularly 2 of them, the Sutra of Golden Light and the Vimalakirti Nidesha, 2 great Mahayana sutras. Well, of course, the Vimalakirti Nidesha is not strictly a sutra. Those of you who listen to the lecture will know why. I won't go into that now. But it's a very, very interesting text. Both of them are. But this particular sutra, the Sutra of the Vimalakirti No, the Sutra of Golden Light, sorry. The Sutra of Golden Light was held in Hampstead Town Hall, not all that far, you see, from Archway, in London. Very easy to gather a big audience. And the place was absolutely packed. I was at that time living in Norfolk, and I would drive down in my Citroën de Chabot and arrive just in time, in the nick of time, at Hampstead Town Hall. Banted would be there with his golden caser, quite nattily dressed in a suit, I think he was, or blue blazer. He'd start to give his talk. And as he started to give his talk, the impression I got was that the whole hall was filling with golden light. It was quite an uncanny experience. Everybody was completely entranced. And it was as if he was the monk preaching the Sutra of Golden Light, the very embodiment of the Sutra. It was extraordinary, very, very deeply inspiring, deeply inspiring series of lectures that he gave. And I think it was that series of lectures that inspired me to want to not settle down. I mean, I was getting on, I was nearly 40, and I felt it would be so easy for me to get married, or if not get married, at least settle down as a couple, as an item somewhere. Sorry, that would be good word. But I thought, no, this isn't really good enough. There's so much to be done. I really do believe, that the Dharma is what the world needs. So I went to India. It was the beginning of my journey to the East. But I think not everybody, of course, responded in that way. There's no reason why one should go to the East nowadays to find the Dharma. One doesn't find the Dharma any more in the East than in the West. Or, to put it positively, one can find the Dharma just as easily in the West as in the East nowadays, if not more so. So yes, those series of lectures, and I think they numbered in the end more than 200, were a tremendous source of inspiration to people. And I think established a solid basis for Bhante as a genuine Dharma teacher, and for the movement as a solid movement with a proper basis, a proper lineage as well, because Bhante talked about his teachers and what they had communicated to him. And that was also very inspiring. And of course a lot of these lectures have been turned into books. That was very much part, it soon became part of one of our very important activities, publications. People, well, I suppose if you've got a book, you feel, well, if it's written in black and white, it must be true. But it's this kind of, slightly naive approach that we have to Buddhism, to learning in particular. We think if something is written in a book, it's more important, more kind of concretized than a talk. You might think that. It's not actually so. Listening to me is going to have a bigger effect on you than reading a book by me. Assuming that, well, I'm about to publish a book actually, but I'm going to But we tend to underestimate the power of speech. People don't understand at first that when you are speaking, you're communicating something. And when you communicate something, that changes you, one way or another. And you may agree with me or you may disagree with me. You may assent or affirm what I say, or you may react to me. You see, there are those two broad possibilities. So we should be a bit careful who we listen to. Well, I think as Buddhists, we've already begun to develop a critical ear. Be careful, be aware of what people are saying to you. Be aware what people are writing. Don't assume that it's correct. Bring your critical faculty to it. And we learnt all these things. Little by little. In fact, it's an aphorism of Bhante's. Bhante's got lots of wonderful aphorisms. I used to have a girlfriend who, I'm rather fond of aphorisms myself, you see, and I would come out with them and she'd say, Ashvajit, did I ask for an aphorism? But anyway, what was I saying? Yes, the Dharma is not taught, it's caught. You can learn, of course you can learn from books, you can learn lists of this and lists of that, and they may be helpful, indeed they are helpful. You need to learn a few lists, but most of all, the Dharma is caught. And you catch it from your friends, or perhaps just a little bit more experienced than yourself. You even catch it from friends who are less experienced than yourself, quite frankly. And we've got 8 young women in Astana, where I'm based at the moment, 8 fortunate young women. And I think the first 2 of them that I met sort of complimented me on being a fine teacher. Just after I'd been talking to them for a few minutes, I said, is that so? I don't think of myself as a teacher. If you learn something from me, well, that's fine. But I'm very conscious that that's not my primary function. My primary function is to be myself. In fact, I can't really be anything else nowadays. Do you see what I mean? If I want to give a teaching, if the thought occurred to me, I'd have to think about it quite carefully, what I wanted to say. And that has its value. But in a way, we've got enough teachings. We've got thousands of teachings. What we need is spiritual friendship, kalyana mitrata, of other men or other women, preferably someone of one's own sex, actually. It tends to be less complicated. Or rather, if it's opposite sex, there can be complications, as we know. We want to keep clear of complications which plague us. What else can I say? So the movement moved on. After the Sutra of Golden Light and the Vimalakirti Nidesha lectures, after 10 years, I went to India. After 10 years, it took me 10 years to feel confident enough that I could go out by myself, as it were, and I did go a lot of the time by myself, that I could keep up my practice and be confident that I was doing the Dharma. So that's something to remember too, that although you may have quite a long training, 5, 6, even 10 years as a mitra, before becoming an order member, that doesn't mean that you're sort of fully blown, that you're fully fledged. There's another process of learning. When you've got a case around this thing on your neck, well, quite apart from the fact that you've been involved in a long period of training and initiation, ritual, sometimes lasting 4 months, there's a big change. Something has happened. You start thinking, well, who am I? Where is this I? Is it here? Is it here? Is it down here? Where is it? So, how do I present myself? What sort of persona do I project? You start thinking a bit more seriously, Well, perhaps you don't think, perhaps you just do. There's a famous saying by Goethe which says, how does a man discover himself, or a woman? Not by thinking about it, but by acting. You have to act, you realise that you have to act. We're a movement, we're a movement of action. And, well, I'm very glad that Shanti Prabhu asked me to act. And that I've come here and had the opportunity of saying a few words to you about the early days of the movement. And if you've got any questions, well, I'd be very happy to respond to them in whatever way may seem appropriate to me. I could walk out the door, I could ignore you, I could shout at you, I could come and give you a slap, or I could answer you reasonably, nicely. Anyway, whatever. Do you have anything that you'd like to ask about the early days, or even about the later days, relatively speaking, of the movement?
There was a question this morning about what the teaching was like. You sort of touched on it, really.
Yes.
Yeah, when you went on to Sakura, you had 2 order members.
Yes.
they were talking the practices, but
Yes.
what was their teaching?
Well, their teaching was, well, I've always taught in the way that I was taught in those days, by those two young men and by Bante. I noticed that the way they taught was very, very similar, if not identical, to the way Bante taught. Of course, when Bante taught it, it had a greater sort of weight, a greater kind of depth somehow. And what I found, of course, when Bante taught, I suppose he taught the mindfulness of breathing, that it really was the mindfulness of breathing, that he himself was deeply aware of his breathing. So he would usually demonstrate. He would say, when I would breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and you count, and so on. You get the idea. He would demonstrate, and you would feel he was really into it, really deeply immersed in it. And as the class went on, you would feel the silence somehow deepening. And you were really participating, really getting into jhana. It didn't seem particularly difficult in those days to get into jhana, just to feel the priti arising, the bliss, feeling one's energy moving. It was very easy to do with him. Later on, of course, when he stopped teaching and others started taking his place, it wasn't perhaps so easy. People particularly who hadn't listened to him and been taught by him, they had a bit of learning to do themselves. They had to develop confidence in their own practice, and that just by being themselves, they were actually communicating, of what it was, communicating what it was all about. But essentially it was the same. Mindfulness of breathing, 4 stages, you all know. Metta bhavana, 5 stages. But one also felt, in the metta bhavana, that when Bante was, directing us to develop metta towards a good friend, that he himself knew what that meant. That he himself had a number of really good friends, and that, one felt that his heart was open, that there was genuine, real friendship there. And, well, that was inspiring, of course. And then when one was expanding one's metta towards all living beings, well, one really wanted to do that. It was genuine, it was real. So I think that was what Bante was able to communicate. It wasn't just an idea. And, well, his life bears witness to that in a way, that he's given his life for the Dharma, for other people. Had he lived in other times when the Dharma was widespread, he might have led a very different life. He said to himself, he might have spent his time in a monastery studying and meditating. But he didn't. That wasn't the need of the time, and still isn't.
In a similar way, when you first taught on edible tree, can you recall what it was like, right at the very beginning?
I remember.
Because you weren't ordained very well.
Well, I think Bante asked me to teach even before I was ordained. Or teach in a sense. We've been studying, I told you about this text, the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. One day he was visiting a Buddhist group somewhere distant, and so he wasn't there that night. So he said, Michael, I want you to lead study this evening. I thought, what? No, I hardly knew what the text was about. So anyway, so I did my best. I led the chanting that evening, and after I think we visualised the stupa, and then after that we plunged into the text. And I still remember the bit that we read, curiously enough. What we read was that the influence of nirvana upon samsara apparently, according to the text anyway, the action of nirvana, or those who are nirvanized, shall we say, those who have gained enlightenment, or those who are on the way to enlightenment, what is the action of such people on the world? The action is that of perfuming. Strange idea. So apparently nirvana perfumes, or those who are nirvanized, perfumes those who are as yet unenlightened. And apparently, according to the text, it works the other way around too. It's not that when you gain enlightenment or move towards enlightenment that you're not affected by other people. Other people perfume you. I think perhaps you realise that already. That in one way or another you've been quite deeply affected by other people, according to the way they behave towards you. But it's a bit like perfume. So I trust that you will communicate a pleasant smell to others. No, unpleasant. But maybe what they need is an unpleasant one sometimes too. So life is a mixture of light and dark, high and low, shadow and brightness.
Can I just ask, I suppose one of the things that struck me about the film that we saw, and the sort of impression it gave those retreats, like there was quite a lot of fluidity and openness to different ideas and flexibility of thinking.
Yes,
which I suppose we've said is kind of a product a bit of the times as well. But how much do you think that's been important in your life and development, that ability to have a flexibility of mind and openness to a cliche?
Well, no, I think that question does mean quite a lot to me, actually. I think I've been through phases. I've been through phases of trying to acquire authenticity or acquire authority. And so I've been through the text and studied the text and got myself the word perfect. Yeah? And then realised, this is not it. See what I mean? I've got to be open to people. People that are important. What the things that they're interested in. It's a two-way thing, it's communication. Really, is what it's all about. I mean, so we do need a few lists. We do need a clear conceptual understanding, insofar as it's possible, of what we're about. But it's in the context of these things that we communicate. It's an opportunity to communicate. Oh yes, if we're seriously practicing, we do need some kind of yardstick, I suppose, by which to measure ourselves. Well, we have those in the 5 or the 10 precepts, or in the 6 perfections. But it's the interplay of minds that is really exciting. Who are you? What do you think? What has made you who you are? What do you believe? These are interesting things, vital things, obviously. So, one studies assiduously, one absorbs as much as one can. People vary a lot in their ability to do that, in their recall. And then you drop it. It's like the proverbial raft. You need a raft to cross the river. How foolish to carry it about on the other side. But, of course, what's on the other side? On the other side is opportunity for rich interaction, discussion of ideas, thrashing things out, which is wonderful, enjoyable. As well as, of course, opportunity for altruistic activity. That's a whole other thing. The objectification of compassion.
You mentioned earlier that Buddhism is called, not taught. I've heard that a lot, and I don't understand. Can we get too bogged down in trying to read things and spend more time reading and less time, learning the Dharma and less time practicing the Dharma? I'm thinking from a personal point of view where I find some of the things I read and study extremely difficult. I'm not someone who easily retains things. And there were times when I started to wonder if I really could become a Buddhist.
Yeah.
But do you think that's possible, that you can get too wrapped up in what
Yes,
study you
I do actually. I do think you can get too concerned with the conceptualisation or the articulation, putting down in words of experience and the path. What happened in the days of the Buddha? Presumably, people would go along there and meet the Buddha. He'd say a few words to them. They wouldn't see him for years after that. And they go back and perhaps meet him again. There'll be another short exchange of words. Off you go again. So, yes, I think that one can put too much emphasis on I think that, obviously there are things that one needs to take to heart, like impermanence, like the ultimate emptiness of personality. That ultimately your personality is infinitely flexible. And let's hope it moves in the right direction, given that it can move. All emotion, that's to say unenlightened emotion, I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, is bound up with suffering. It's perhaps quite difficult to take that particular one on board. There's a book called What Makes You Not a Buddhist, which some of you may have come across. And one of the things that makes you not a Buddhist is if you don't believe that all emotion is painful. Well, now that needs a bit of unpacking. And I think by emotion, the writer was meaning emotion that clings to people, passionate emotion, which can be both clinging and an expression of hatred. So all emotion of that sort involves suffering. And of course that's difficult, especially if you are a loving kind of personality who forms bonds with people. You want that to remain, you want that to, it's very easy to grasp. So another very simple teaching is wherever there is grasping, there is liable to be suffering. Very simple. It's very difficult to practice that. Right, and if you find yourself grasping, we'll try to turn it to giving. Okay, well then, I'd just like to wish you every success in your practice and encourage you to reflect on what an extraordinary movement we have. There's nothing like it in my experience. Not that my experience is all-encompassing, of course. I can't claim to know absolutely. But I have been a Buddhist for the greater part of my life, for 45 years. And visited other Buddhist groups, other religious groups. I've travelled widely. And nowhere have I found such a degree of clear practice and warm communication. And that is extraordinary, actually. The ability just to sit down with a group of people and talk, about anything, sensibly, interestedly, even excitedly. It's a wonderful thing. And to receive, very simple, straightforward, easily put into practice teachings, which lead to happiness, which lead ultimately